Welcome to the Sacred Child Summit. I'm your host, Kathleen Sherrick, and I'm pleased to introduce today Dr. Mia Kalef. Dr. Kalef is a former chiropractor and craniosacral therapist of 25 years. She founded a center for therapy and education called Emerging Families in the early 2000s. Later, she wrote a book called The Secret Life of Babies: How Our Prebirth and Birth Shape Our World. More recently, she's written a book called It's Never Too Late: Healing Prebirth and Birth at Any Age. She incorporates osteopathic healing, craniosacral, ceremonial healing, as well as ancestral work in working with babies and their families. She lives on the west coast of Canada and teaches internationally, and I'm so pleased to welcome you here, Mia. Thank you for being part of this conversation.
Thank you for the invitation, Kathleen. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, you know, we sometimes as adults, we speculate about early childhood, about birth experiences and all, and how they might affect us as we're adults. But how really, like, why does it matter? Things like conception, things like our in utero experiences. What have you found in your work that seems to indicate it would be good to pay attention to this?
Mm-hmm. Well, in my experience, every single person I've worked with had a desire to be matched in their own essential signature, the soul that they came here with. And whether they knew what was ahead and had an instinct that it might be hard, or whether they came in just with their hearts open, ready for love, every single person wants to have the love they came for matched. And so if the family was having some troubles, be them innocent or intentional troubles, we all want to circle back and make sure that at every stage of our development, whether that's when we're coming in as a conceptus, as a soul, spirit, whether it's when we're first entering our energetic bodies at conception and really entering our full bodies later in development as an embryo, we want to figure out how someone there can really feel us, really see us, really match the goodness and the uniqueness that we are. And we won't rest until we get it. Now, some people don't realize that's what they're looking for. So they're out there, as you know, trying to get things through shopping, through a certain kind of working, a kind of an addictive pattern, or always looking to their partner, their friend, even their child to fulfill something they missed. And so I feel like it all matters because we want to matter. We're all a miracle that we got here. And until we fulfill that sense of self, of being matched and celebrated, welcomed and resonated with, really known, we just don't feel whole. And we want that wholeness.
That's really such a beautiful way to put kind of the incoming of life into a biological container. And the work that you've done is so inspiring. Are there any particular tips that you have for us as we look to become more whole? For example, to investigate perhaps what our experiences may have been and how we might go about that, these birth experiences or even before that?
Well, I would say if you feel that something's out of sorts, trust yourself. If there's something that you long for, keep following it. There are so many clues that can point towards pre-birth and birth memories being afoot, and some of them can range to the subtle, which could be something like occasionally feeling insecure about being in a group, or being shy about presenting yourself, or an idea that if you want to bring it into manifestation, you feel you shouldn't, you couldn't, or even worse, you might be scared. Those are some of the milder types of indications, but some people really do suffer with the volume way turned up, and we don't always know why that is. Sometimes they didn't have other resources like a loving parent or a whole combination of reasons, but people can really suffer with serious anxiety, serious depression, serious sense of not belonging, of not feeling wanted, lovable, and then even more extreme suicidal tendencies and thoughts, behaviors, certain kinds of really strong addictions to substances that maybe were administered at birth that set up a norm that we should continue to reinforce by what we put in our bodies. And I really feel like not enough of the world yet is aware of this and looking for those kinds of indicators to point towards pre-birth and birth. But when you start looking at it through this lens, it's simultaneously very harrowing and saddening that we're bringing in children, or we've been brought in with those hampers, but it's also very encouraging because then we can go to that place, see what got missed, see what it felt like to be interrupted with those and those particular, whatever they were, and let the grief or rage or difficult feelings that were there come out finally.
So it sounds like it's important to feel the emotional piece of whatever our experience was before we could communicate it in a way that we identify as communication as adults. The feeling component sounds really important.
It can be very cleansing. There's a difference, though, between going and looking for the emotion and asking for it to be unrooted, which can sometimes be a little willful and a little hard to access. But certainly when it comes by grace, it's an enormous relief. I always tell this story to my clients. It was a little video I saw years ago. I think my husband showed it to me. It was a short video of a polar bear in the Arctic being caught and anesthetized just to be able to put a tracker on his ear and his fur so they could study polar bears. And of course, nobody likes the idea of a wild creature being captured and anesthetized. But what I saw next really helped me understand exactly what it's like for us too, which is if we've been captured and tortured in any way whatsoever, when we come to, we have to have a response to it. And when this polar bear woke up, finally, he was still on camera, he started gnashing his teeth and clawing and having all the behaviors he would have naturally have had at being captured had he not been anesthetized. And so I find that when people do touch down into whatever was done to them, either, inadvertently, or they just picked it up, or it was a hospital procedure, they actually have to have their response to it. So it can run the gambit of a whole host of different responses. And yeah, we have to complete the cycle. We have to complete the circuit.
To acknowledge the response that we had sounds like the very first thing, to acknowledge that we had a response, yes, whether it was done to us or whether we participated knowing or unknowingly or something like that. And what kinds of experiences are you talking about that might initiate a response that ends up being subdued or inhibited?
Well, I haven't given this thought before, but now that you're asking, I think of what we call imprints or unwanted challenges that we absorb. I think of them in really two different categories. One of them is through osmosis, just being in the atmosphere, in the field of, say, mother's emotions or family's emotions coming through the mother while in the womb. Or as you're kind of like a satellite coming into the atmosphere to be conceived, what you kind of, intuit and sort of sense in the field. It's kind of diffuse, it's kind of osmotic. It is just by being near a certain environment or near a certain influence. So that's sort of one category, just picking up. The other most often happens during pregnancy and during birth. And I think of them as actual interventions where hospital birth support, maybe for reasons that are life-saving and we really appreciate them, or for reasons that are just matter of course and out of training, actually get in between the mother and baby by administering what could be medications to subdue pain, which could be supportive, or they come in with certain instruments like forceps or a vacuum, and in their minds assisting baby out when it looks like the baby is stuck, or cesarean, and sometimes all of the above. Now, as I said, sometimes they're life-saving, and we really want to thank the amazing training and know-how of birth support people in the hospital. And even if it is life-saving, and especially when it's just as a matter of course, we have to do what it takes to help the baby and mother recover and in a way have their responses to what that felt like for them. Because babies will get slowed down, they'll get overexcited if they're induced. We have to take care of that in their nervous system, or they're going to think that's how life should be. And they're always going to be having a hard time trying to figure out their timing, figure out where their own axis comes from, whether to please others, whether to please themselves. There's a whole list of possible outcomes.
So prenatal experiences and birth experiences can either inadvertently even help set templates for life in a way.
That's right. I always kind of joke just to make it digestible, but if at birth broccoli gets into the mix, you'll always want to have broccoli. And if you have someone singing, welcoming you, you will always remember your song. And if there's a particular chemical there or someone else's idea that you're not doing it right and we need to change how you're doing it, you'll always feel like I'm not doing it right. So it's just the way that birth is set up with all of these very natural chemicals that are there to create bonding, combination of adrenaline and a combination of oxytocin. It creates an addiction with whatever's there so that mom and baby will get together and remember that bond. So anything you put in there is going to stay too. So we have to be mindful of what we put in that mix.
One of the things that it occurs to me as you're talking is within that mix that we may or may not have much control over is the field. And what is the field? And in your books, you talk about the family field, and I know we can't go into it all here because it's quite beautiful the way that you introduce it, the way that you explore it, and it would be wonderful if people could contact you afterwards if they're interested in knowing more about it or go into your book a little more. But kind of briefly, what does a family field mean? And does that extend to anyone who may be around? For example, a physician or a midwife or a doula or things like that may be around in utero for the baby or during birth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a big subject, and I'm not a physicist, so I'm not necessarily an authority on fields, but I have been curious over the years. And I think it was Michael Faraday in the early 1920s, he developed this concept of a field, and mostly around the use of magnets, that you could feel the effect of magnets on metal at a distance from their actual physical shape. And I really love the work of Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about something called morphic resonance, which is how is it that across space and time we relate? And it's kind of a scientific way of describing what the Vedics have spoken about since 10,000 years, which is karma. And how is it that across space and time we can have influence on each other? So certainly since the beginning of the pandemic, we healers have had an opportunity to put to test what we've always suspected, which is we can do healing at a distance. And I think a lot of people believed it's possible, but it hasn't necessarily been necessary or digestible. But, for the past almost 2 years, I've been sitting here as we are and doing osteopathic, craniosacral, ancestral, family field healing at a distance. And I don't know how to explain it, but let's just say that our energies extend beyond the scope of our bodies, and we are all connected in a webbing. And some people are more sensitive to that than others. And when a baby is being born, I've talked to many, many people who thought that what the doctor was saying to the mother was who they should be. So the doctor would say to the mother, or actually, even if the doctor didn't say anything, but had a feeling of fear and was losing his or her own center, that baby could feel that something was dangerous or wrong. Or someone would say to the mother, oh, this isn't good. And the baby would say, I'm not good. And then when they realized it, when they had a chance to regress, they got that actually it was someone else's idea. And I often ask the question, well, does it feel like it came from the inside, this feeling you have about yourself? Or did it feel like it came from the outside? And then we can kind of get a sense of like who, where, how far away. And then in the case of the family field, it's important to work with recent ancestors or even distant ancestors and their influence on our lives. Because sometimes when we go to release a pattern in the body workers will tell you they experience this all the time. It doesn't always stay or it doesn't release very easily. Even if we've worked out the tissues and all the muscles and joints are nice and relaxed, after a few seconds, it wants to come back. So we have to ask the question. First question layer is it coming from an emotional experience? Is it coming from something within your own life? And if we are able to answer that question and the tissues totally release, we know, okay, that's our work for today. But if that doesn't release things, sometimes you can actually get a sense that the emotional tension or the physical tension is actually, in a way, sewn and knitted into something bigger than the person's body that maybe crosses space and time in your own imagination as a practitioner. And if we can get our hearts and minds and our prayers around that shape, around the full spectrum of who else before this person suffered in a similar or maybe related way and never got the compassion, the healing, the opportunity to grieve that they needed, then maybe the whole system can release through the work of the person that's actually receiving the healing. So it's very nice.
So this is one of the concepts of healing 7 generations before and 7 generations back. One of the ways that it can be done in real time is what you're talking about, is honoring, and by honoring, I mean seeing patterns that may be in the ancestral field. Is that what you're talking about?
I feel that what I just described is probably a drop in the bucket of the vast undertaking we are actually called to when it comes to ancestor practices, ancestor reverence. And it's a big part of what I do as well, which is how do we set the table for the feast to remember them in their goodness and in their best ways, and to heal the ones who, for whatever reasons, maybe things they did in their own life, maybe because ancestor reverence has fallen away, what do they need in order to be brought all the way into the ancestral realm? And it's a very large topic, but you know, a lot of ailments, especially for babies, especially at birth, are coming from multi-generational experiences that need tending. And it's a cultural reworking that we're suggesting.
Is
it's
that
quite
all?
big. Yeah. We could spend quite a while.
Yes, we could. And thank you for the beautiful take and insights that you have on that process from the work you've done for so long. The impact, you said imprints from the field. Are imprints things that we typically come in with? Or are they things that kind of occur to us as we're coming into embodiment? You mentioned souls finding their way in. What are imprints and what's their role in this process?
Well, in truth, there are imprints that are positive that we inherit. Things like a particular smile we have comes from our grandmother, or a certain talent for playing the piano might be coming down from, you know, multiple people who came before us. So not all imprints are negative, but when we're dealing with wanting to transform and transmutate the effects of imprints we don't want, they could be things like, you know, maybe mom had a whole bunch of kids already and she was really tired and didn't have enough time to really sing the song to this particular baby she was carrying. And maybe there wasn't enough money or nutrition. Things that are very innocent, things that we could understand as an adult, but as a baby, as a prenate, even if we understand as an adult, we still want to get what we wanted. So it's okay to be upset as a prenate. As an adult, we can reason it. So we just do the tending that was missed, the holding, the resting, the speaking to, the nourishing. Imprints could be things like alcohol in the family, drug abuse in the family, sexual abuse in the family, things that are secrets, things that no one will talk about or are feeling safe enough to confront, they somehow find their way into a feeling that the prenate, the baby inside, can experience. And it can just feel like, what is that? It doesn't feel good. It feels dark. Or if it is a substance, it can create a whole effect in the baby's system, whether the mom's imbibing or taking, or whether it's the father or the partner, even if it skips a generation. Sometimes there's a feeling that's in one's body. And as we mentioned, the birth interventions, those can be unwanted imprints. Things like being induced, babies always feel it as an awful taste in their stomach, awful taste in their mouth, and pervades a lot of their cells. And they just want to get it out. They want to connect with a really clean, healthy placenta and a clean, healthy liver so that they can just get it out. But mom was given it too. So there's just a host of various ways where we're like, I adapted to that. I incorporated it to get along in this world that I was being introduced to, but I really don't want it. It's not actually me. How do I differentiate from it?
And I think you mention in your books that some of these imprints can occur as emotions around conception, even so, even before utero. Is that true? Emotions of what would that be like, for example?
Yeah. Well, imagine coming here as a slip of light, cleaving from your source. You are certainly carrying information from perhaps other lives or other conditioning. I mean, you have a nature. You're not a blank slate. But as light, you're wanting to bring this light to the world. You're wanting to be seen in your radiance, in your beauty, in your uniqueness. And if someone else's light, who you're arriving towards, isn't turned up to match the radiance or is afraid to see their own light and therefore won't see yours, it can feel like a total heartbreak. It can feel like a shock. It can feel like, oh, wait, I didn't sign up for this. It can feel like a message that you have to digest for the rest of your life is don't shine or don't be this, don't do this, And sometimes people's memories are of just not being matched with that light. Some people's memories are they felt that somebody wasn't ready for them. They felt that they weren't happy or there was real trouble. There's a whole range. And we're sentient at this time. We are aware. And the emotion comes later when we have the centers to have it. But when we as adults or in children reflect back, it is an emotional experience because it explains what that feeling's been all this time.
So being sentient means that there's a consciousness. So there's an awareness. Is that what you're saying? Even though the emotions may come later to kind of explain that, they're the prenate or even before conception, there's a consciousness that exists. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's my experience, both myself and everyone I work with. Yeah, I haven't spoken to someone yet who was willing to do this work anyways, that didn't have a sense of also being aware then.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems that the more that we as a culture are aware of these things happening so early, and if we take it as a given instead of an unusual circumstance, or instead of something that only happens with something incredibly traumatic, that we could really go deeper with our own understanding of who we have come here to be. Because this is really, we're talking about the early stages of life right now, and yet there's a long life to be lived after that as well. And it's all connected with that through line of starting as a conscious, sentient being, is what you're saying.
True words you're speaking there. And, when we think about what we bring to this world and all of our interests in helping the planet, be loved the way we want to be loved. It would be such a beautiful extension as we treat the mother here as we were treated. If that can be honored and welcomed as the light that we are, imagine we wouldn't have to be coerced to take care of the planet. We wouldn't have to be scared into it. It would be a celebration, just like it is for us, could be for us.
I agree. I agree. What a beautiful way to put it. That's a lovely way to put it. What can we do as adults about babies that we may know that are either coming into the world now, that we may have someone in our family who's pregnant, someone who's trying to get pregnant? What can we do to either hold space for this kind of incoming soul? Mm-hmm. And really, what's the role of communication here? How do we communicate with, and do we communicate? And if so, how? Before conception or before birth?
It's a big question.
It is.
I love every inch of it. So let's say someone is hoping to conceive a child. You can make an offering in nature. You can go to nature indicating your intention for receiving a child. And it could be in the form of food. It could be a libation. The spirits love spirits. They love fine alcohol. If you pour it on a tree or on the earth and say, I'm coming here with a full intention to come into relationship with my child's spirit now. And then watch your dreams. Watch the new thoughts that come to you and make the offering semi-regularly. Maybe start well ahead of time. And if the child has already arrived, children, even when they are in the womb, feel like attention is the equivalent of being touched. When they're even too small to feel, even the edges of the womb or the feeling of pressure, certainly hands, they love being sung to. They love being spoken of. They love being wondered about. And women, when they're pregnant, can learn the various stages of embryonic and fetal development. Just have it in their minds. What are you growing today? And not that you have to be on top of it or right or exact, but just to wonder. Babies delight in being interested in. So that's a kind of a thing. And the songs can come through and your friends can sing, your mother, your grandmother. There's always talk about the women of the village and gathering women to celebrate this amazing arrival of spirit into form. And if the baby is already born, same thing. I mean, you can really look at this child. Actually, when you do look at a newborn, if you're willing to see, you do see the vastness of the cosmos in their faces. It's hard not to see it if you slow down and just wonder and open. And all sorts of ways of speaking could be just asking questions, saying, I wonder what it was like for you to be in this body. What was birth like for you? And they'll start to talk. Sometimes babies will show you something on their face. If they got injured on their head, they'll point, they'll poke. When they're old enough, they'll show on you, on your face and your body. And I think of it as somatosensory phenomenology, finding a way to put words to what you're feeling and sensing in your body and in another's body. So just trying to describe it. Oh, that's what it was like for you. You felt that on your face. Oh, and what comes to you is compassion, interest, regret, a promise that we'll never let that happen to you again. And here, what do you need now? How can I touch you so that it could feel better? Like just getting into these magical conversations that don't really have black and white answers or directions, but you just feel into how to talk with baby. They'll start showing you, crying, laughing, thanking you.
Well, and if to stay in the wonder of it is to stay in the gray area. I think there's a great pressure to kind of be black and white. It's a yes or a no. It's a and that may by this I mean many of the beautiful things that you shared. Some of them are done now with apps, for example.
Uh-huh.
And for example, keeping track of how big baby is in utero.
Mhm.
And it occurs to me that many of the young women that I know have used these apps to keep track to make sure baby's okay. So it's
Mhm.
almost coming from more of a fear base than a let's communicate and let's grow together.
Yeah.
How do you address something like that? Because it's very pervasive. The whole concept of being afraid baby will be okay.
Yes. I love that you pointed that out. I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a sense that there's a right way to do it and a right way to be. And if you're not in that category, you could ... And it's a lot of pressure, you're right, for the mothers and for the babies. The babies will feel that they have to get it right. And maybe they're not right. The pressure to, conform, produce, perform. And I think when I mean, there's a lot of things to say about it, but what occurs to me is tracking development against a curve that's right takes out relationality. It is non-relational, essentially. We know that babies thrive in connection, thrive in relationship. And if they aren't tended to, they sometimes don't. So I think it's, again, could be life-saving to have markers of what we want to see at certain stages, definitely. And what happens if the mom could put the phone down and ask baby, how are you? Is there anything you need me to know? There have been countless women I know who've been pregnant that when we went into session and they had a question they were scared to know the answer to, they were able to get the answer by communicating with their baby, and the answer always surprised them. It was never something they could see coming or think through themselves. And they were guided. They were guided not just by their baby, but by the we of the relationship. And, of course, the spiritual dimension that guides us all comes down between us when we meet in a good way. So I think practicing feeling, practicing opening, having support so you're not scared. You can, you've got people you can rest back on. It's a big deal, especially in these times. Allows a woman to open and tune in.
And you use a phrase that I marked in the book because I just love it. And it is the ability to rest in the unknown. To me, Mia, this is something that we're almost losing in some of these experiences with incoming souls and with conception and in utero and birth and all the resting in the unknown, the wonder of it. And what insights might help us to stay in that wonder and rest in that unknown? And what did you mean by the phrase?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know I get very caught up in needing to know and having things planned and eliminating chance. That's a real big habit I have. And, for myself, I find meditation practice really good for kind of teaching my ego that you want it that way, but but life isn't really that way. And look, when you let go, you don't die. The worst thing doesn't happen. You just practice letting go. And, for me, it's been a life practice so far, almost 50 years. It's a lot of practice. And I remember I was going through a very challenging physical experience once. And I called one of my mentors on the phone, and I said, I just feel like I can't do this. I can't let go. And he said, just imagine a really big, beautiful hand is underneath you, holding you and holding all of this. And as soon as he said that, I went, right, I'm not alone. I think control comes from the breakdown of relationship. We want to steer when we don't trust there's an other. And the other doesn't have to always be a human being. We know that humans can be rough with each other, but at least finding a spiritual dimension you can be in relationship with may just be that first step in saying, okay, something's got me. And if you're, atheistic, that's okay too. You can work with nature. You can work with the wind, the sun, the moon. They're real.
Mhm. Beautiful. What about the unusual scenario, which we hear a lot about these days, of assisted reproduction?
Mhm.
And especially, if you may have the sperm of one donor, the egg of another donor being carried by a third donor, and, that kind of scenario. What are ways that we can be attentive to? And I love the phrase that you use there, attention is like touch to the fetus.
Yeah.
Attention is like touch. What are
Mhm.
ways that we can be attentive to family fields and all the other things that might be at play within that kind of scenario?
Mhm. I really like that we're going to talk about it. It's super important. And I'll admit, for many years, I was just against any type of assisted reproduction because I thought there wasn't going to be a way to replace what got missed. And then I got really serious about exploring what happens when the first two cells meet. What is that courtship? What is that allurement? What is that dance of discernment, union, separation? Like, what is that sequence and what guides it? And can it be reenacted so that a baby who was brought, as you describe, from various sources and first essentially created in a lab, can that child grow from that situation and feel still that they are whole? Can we give that to them? And I have experienced that the answer is yes. And I'll just give one example. A woman I work with who her husband was the provider of the sperm for her child. And after many years of hoping to be pregnant herself, she invited a woman she knew to be the egg donor. For people who don't know what that means, it means that the woman carried the baby, but the embryo was grown in a lab from another woman and her husband. And for a long time, she wrestled with, is this my child? Or have I adopted this child? Because she couldn't feel what I call a conception gateway through herself. And it's something I believe women long to feel, even if they don't have children or they adopt or they conceive with donors, is that there's a channel. There's actually a physical channel that opens from a woman, from the earth to the sky, through which something conceives. And it doesn't have to be a baby. But when it is a child and you've carried a child, it can feel like the child didn't come through you if that contact wasn't made from that channel. And we did a piece of work where we looked back over the timeline to see how long ago did this soul actually wish to join this mother. Not the body of the child, but the soul. And it turns out that that soul was there all through the years of her infertility journey. And when we made contact with her child's spirit soul then and helped that knit into the present situation, their relationship completely changed and the mother just dropped. I remember she used to wear her hair in a very austere fashion. And after that session, her hair was flowing and braided. And I just went, I don't understand it, but she was satisfied. Now that's just the mother. Babies' developmental experiences will also open and relax when we give them that experience of tracking them through their continuity. So I recommend when people are doing assisted reproduction to ask the lab about the timing of when are sperm being thawed, when are eggs being retrieved, when are they being introduced to each other, using natural insemination whenever possible instead of ICSI if possible, and just tracking the consciousness, just seeing what it's like to contemplate this being coming into being, whatever is coming to you, just sitting vigil, taking a few days off work during the growing days of the embryo. And hovering around in being the shelter, the sanctuary of this miracle yourself, even at a distance, even in another country, across the country. It really is a beautiful thing.
I love that notion of the lingering in, it's almost you're lingering in a chalice that you're creating for this incoming experience. And it's such a beautiful way to look at it and to think about it and to emote around it. So as adults, we may have people that we know that are going through this kind of experience. We may have gone through some experiences that we don't recall ourselves. So when you say that it's never too late, what do you mean by that? Does that mean some of the kind of large issues that you spoke about at the beginning with alcohol or with drugs or those kinds of things, that those can be addressed, and that emotions from early on, preconception, they can also be addressed, that it's never too late to become more whole? Is that what you're talking about?
You got it.
Okay, I'm all on board.
You got it.
Let me get my pen.
Yeah, there's lots of babies and children who are like, just on the subject still of IVF and assisted reproduction. In case someone was listening, but their child is already born through these methods, I just want to reassure that you can go back and, smooth out, integrate, re-invite, revivify, discharge pressure. Like, there's all sorts of things that are lingering that we can kind of use as handholds in the field or in your body. And what do you need? How can we serve? What's been missed? What's wanted? And I humbly acknowledge that some imprints are life's work. Like, I experience, and maybe you might have your own version of your experience, but I feel that time kind of spirals, and every 5, 10, 7 years, whatever it is, I notice myself reworking a different camera angle of something I thought I'd already attended to. But it's how we evolve, right? Is also by tending our imprints. It brings more consciousness, more compassion to us to lend attention to our suffering if we do it skillfully. So it's not that necessarily healing should be done, but some things do clear and don't come back. And some things we have to just garden a little over time.
To tend, to garden, these are just beautiful ways of putting things that we might otherwise feel pressure to fix, resolve, take care of. And it sounds like it's a beautiful way to give ourselves some grace, some compassion, some self-empathy for what we may have experienced that we may continue to experience in a more transmuted kind of way. And that, again, coming back to the beautiful phrase of attention, giving attention to something can be healing in itself, can be the start of this kind of a healing journey to wholeness.
Indeed.
Dr. Mia, is there anything else that you would like to offer to us today? Anything else that's on your heart to share?
Oh, well, just knowing, Kathleen, that you are inviting this gathering, that there is a place for this in our world, and enough people that are listening and curious and interested. I just want to acknowledge you and all of the folks that you're bringing into this, because it's so exciting. It brings so much light to our world, and so much light is available right now. So I just feel just so happy and assured that the work continues, and all the pioneers that I've learned from, their work continues. So just, big bow, big thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you to you. Thank you to you for your phenomenal work, hands-on with babies and adults that care for babies. And we are all babies. We are all babies.
Yes.
Thank you for your wisdom and for For those who are listening who would like more information about Dr. Mia's work, you can look for the links that accompany this video, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you so much.